Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DOVECOTE. It is um, August 15th at 6 o'clock p.m. EST, a Thursday, uh, mysteriously for once. and uh, my guest today is Kayla, or otherwise known as Ratwave, from games, from Psycho Dungeon and other projects. Kayla, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Kayla Dice. I release games as Ratwave Gamehouse. I am a former wrestler, a former stand-up comedian, a former teacher, and now I make games all day. So Psycho Dungeon was the most recent thing I kickstarted, so people might be familiar with that. Before that, I also did a Kickstarter for Terminal, which is like a dream hopping hacktivist pirates game. It's kind of inspired by The Matrix. Other things people might know me from were Transgender Deathmatch Legend, and Fear the Taste of Blood, which was in Plus One Zine Club. And yes, I won an award. I think that's where I'll leave off. I'm always like, should I mention that? Do I not mention that? Sometimes.
Wait,
So.
what award did you win?
I was one of the Diana Jones Emerging Designer winners
Oh,
last
yeah.
year. I'm not in the military.
Right.
To clarify an obvious, I hope, fact, I'm not that one.
I was like, oh gosh, because I've railed on that dude so much on the show, like, so I'm glad you brought it up and I didn't have to because I absolutely would have. Yeah, that's really cool. Like I think it's really cool that you got that though. Like I just like based on your output, like um it really, seems like you've put out a lot of really great work. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm prolific. I think I can say, which does make when I'm like, what do I say? What games do I say when I'm introducing myself? Especially in things where if I'm not coming into a place specifically of like, oh, I'm here to promote this thing. This the focus. If I'm just talking about myself generally, I'm like, I've made a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things.
You made a lot of work and you've also like I feel like um there's a very at least in terms of just like looking at like covers here, I feel like there's like kind of a pulp through line here, which is really interesting, like even going back to like your earliest work.
Yeah, I think some of it is often in a weird way. It's a lot of about like figuring out what visuals I can make happen. And I think that's why a lot of stuff where I've not worked with anyone else takes that. I think Terminal looks very like sleek and stylish. I don't think it looks pulpy, and that's because the cover was entirely done by Gorman Geist, who's a great artist. Um, Psycho Dungeons, like I think Psycho Dungeons interior stuff looks more like pulpy than its cover, which is yeah. I guess if I go to make art myself, outside of like oh I found this public domain stuff, which sometimes I do and get a lot of work out of. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've found a lot of stuff with like public domain things, and sometimes that ends up being almost a starting point for games rather than the end thing. But if I'm not doing that, I'll end up doing a lot of like crude. I may be underselling it by saying crude, but a sort of like very hyper stylized like photo collage stuff, which was skills I first practiced because I paid a lot of attention to baseball in summer 2020.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Um, I forget. I think it was Hawthorne, Natalie Hawthorne, who brought up Sekio Dungeon on this show, and I think then I made this observation. I still kind of stand by it. I feel like it's there's something about its interior design that reads as very museum to me, and I can't fully identify it. I don't I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, Psycho Dungeon's interior visual stuff was interesting for like how that sort of developed. I just realized I'll just drop a link to it's since expired like Kickstarter page, but like people
Oh,
could
I dropped
see
it.
art there if they wanted to get a set. Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I missed that. Um, yeah, but so like there some of that was developing stuff I'd done before and going, oh, what's the most I could push this? But I remember once I worked on the art, I was then trying to like really think of how everything was coming together. Someone observed it looked a bit like the art on like old Game Boy Advances in terms of like when I
Yeah.
was making it look very sort of like noised and half toned and stuff. And so in that, then when I built the layout, I was kind of aiming for like half video game manual, half work manual with some sort of scratchy stuff. So yeah, it like it never fully intended to look like, oh, this is. I didn't want it to look like to pose as an in-universe artifact, but I kind of wanted an element of like, well, yeah, this is probably what from this world looks like a bit, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
it has some reality to it. I really like it. I think it's a great uh to I know that
Thank
I've been
you.
just talking about aesthetics here, but I do want to talk a bit about a bit about Second Dungeon as a game. I really like I'm kind of curious what the inspirations are here, but like the doing a Belonging Outside Belonging game with with kind of as you say here, like these asymmetric roles, I find really interesting. Almost kind of having a GM in a BOB in some ways. Not quite, but like two GMs almost. I'm kind of curious, like what were the inspirations for that, and how did you kind of come up with that concept?
Yeah, I remember. I think like the story concept of Psycho Dungeon came to me like weirdly fully formed. And I want to say I think I was on the way back from Gen Con, which I got to go to because of the emerging designer thing.
Mm,
I think it was the way back from there. I was thinking, I think I was reading some of the things I bought there. And I think I had an idea originally of hacking another game that then the more I read, I was like, I don't think I could write a hack of this style of game. But I liked this idea. So, like, just for explanation, like, the game's plot is in this sort of post fantasy setting when people are at the point of sort of like major breakdowns. All of their troubles and traumas manifest as a psycho dungeon, which is like a literal structure full of nightmarish reminders of their issues, and that's going to gradually drain someone's energy. And then like your main cast are psycho plumbers who are sent into these dungeons who essentially sort of help clear them out and help someone get like not like quite closure, but essentially just like your job is very much more like a sort of first aid, like helping someone pull back from a crisis rather than like being able to stick around and fix things in a longer term sense.
hmm
um so with that as a focus, then I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. I remember I was probably like thinking one was like, oh, I don't think I could do this hack idea of like whatever stuff could it go as. And I remember I landed on yeah, like a BOB system. And I don't usually I mention it's like belonging outside belonging in on the Kickstarter page, mainly because that's the term that's more known, whereas I'm like while it's all of the mechanical things from that lineage, I'm like, this isn't necessarily about like belonging um in a community like outside of a hole in the sort of sense. It like I think it can be it's a lot about like mental health, but I don't necessarily think your characters are immediately marginalized. And I also don't necessarily think they're in community with each other inherently. They could be, but like it can also be a game where exploring the fact that like you don't necessarily know or like people you work with. You just
Yeah.
spend a lot of time with them. And the time is often not pleasant, not necessarily through fault of anyone's there, but just like, yeah, they're kind of, you don't necessarily want to keep hanging out with these people after.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It is interesting how
Eric started
much. Oh,
developing
sorry.
those free roles. Oh yeah, no.
I think it might be having some slight connection
Yeah.
issues. That might make it a little hard. But
I think there's maybe just a bit of a lag.
yeah, I think so. I've also some of your words are cutting out, but it's not like a major issue. It's you're still pretty audible. Uh,
I'm sorry about that.
should be okay. Yeah, you keep going. Sorry.
So yeah, from originally I was trying to think like, okay, maybe like the whole dungeon is its own setting element. And at one point I was going, oh, maybe the dungeon is, I guess, like this looser collection of things, but it has setting elements. It's like, oh, if this monster is a kind of setting element. And then I kept struggling with it, and I've ended up just taking influence from a couple of different things and realized, oh, the dungeon has its own token pool. That was kind of drawing from Galactic 2E by Riley Raffel. And then I also went like, okay, how are they descending from the dungeon? That brought back in the client character who's the person actually affected by this. That made them more prominent. And yeah, I don't know if I like it. It approaches a bit more like it can be approached more as a GM, but I also like if you are more that way in mind and having someone statically be the dungeon rather than passing it around like a setting element, which like the game tells you how to do that. It just also says you could also hold on to it. But I think even if you did, it's like the responsibilities are split up because it's like, oh, sure, if you're the dungeon, you frame the scenes, you introduce the enemies, but like you don't actually pace this game. This pacing is in the hands of who is playing the client, and you're not necessarily who's going to be followed along if you're playing like more sessions of this. That's going to be like the cast of Psycho Plumbers because they're the people who get to be like the main characters of this.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I like what you said about like, or I find interesting what you said about like, how like there's kind of an expectation with like using the term belonging outside belonging that you're inheriting the exact politics of that, or not the politics but the political themes, I think it's interesting how that can kind of how that stuff can kind of be very like pervasive, in terms of the design side. I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want to be like, hey, did this thing specifically inspire you, but I definitely noticed like the client and dungeon stuff is definitely very Galactic 2A. So I'm glad that you took inspiration from that. I think it's a good place to draw inspiration from for this sort of game.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So in terms of the book, like where are you with it now? I mean, I know that obviously you've done the Kickstarter. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So I had all of the book written before the Kickstarter. One of the stretch goals meant we added some. Say we, it is mainly just me. It is just me. That like the book added some extra dungeon textures, which is all the things you can like. I say flavor, but like essentially make a dungeon about. So I added 4 of them. I've written them now, which are gender dysphoria, mental trauma, money issues, and loneliness. Because it's a fun kind of game. They're written. The book's been sent to the editor. The original estimate I had was like maybe mid-August is when I'd get edits back. I spoke to my editor's Alyssa Ridley, who does Biscuit Fun Games like Tournament Arc and Goblin Country and stuff.
Cool.
She's probably going to get it back to me by like 28th of August. So from there, I'll then like put the book into layout, fit any extra art I want to make, And I think that can be a quite speedy process. It's a weird one because I'm like, with the last game I kickstarted Terminal, like that was more sort of through line of I was working on it, I was working on it, I was working on it, and then it was done. Even the working on it I was doing changed. Whereas I've not really worked on Psycho Dungeon for over a month because my part of working on it was finished. It's going to be interesting that when it's my part again, it's going to be I am going back to this, and I think all of the layout stuff I've done already will let me like get my mind locked on it. But yeah, so in the meantime, I'm coding other things I've got coming up. I'm working on a sequel to Transgender Deathmatch Legend, and just sort of doing working on small one-shot stuff to keep myself occupied.
Hell yeah. I have to be honest. I actually have not read Transgender Deathmatch Legend. I'd love to hear about it and the sequel that you're kind of toying around with.
Yeah, sure. So Transgender Deathmatch Legend was a game I released in 2022. It is a card-based beat 'em up for two players, where one of you plays the protagonist in the first game, but I'm renaming it to the face for the second. Who's going to be trans wrestler who's been, sort of like screwed over, pushed around, and is sort of snapping back. I think the line on it I had is like, you put the HRT on in her and the hurt on anyone who sees you.
It's fun.
And then, so in the original game, it's you're just going to get some money that you are owed by a promoter who has like been refusing to pay you since far too long.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to an individual, you meet an enemy who will usually be a sort of like colorful wrestling themed character. Play out a fight as a trick taking game, with each card corresponding to a different sort of attack, and then the class who wins that trick resolving how these things sort of play out. I really enjoy that game. Though I think, at least with the first one, like there's a lot of sides of me going like, yeah, I don't want this to seem too crude. I don't want this to seem too trashy or whatever. And
Right.
I think Transgender Deathmatch Legend 2 is me going like, oh, it's 2 years on and stuff. I think I showed that like I made a game that wasn't tasty, and now I feel comfortable attempting to be, more sort of like confronting things I avoided because I think I can do that better.
Yeah.
So for the sequel, there's some revised rules for how like the game works, but then there's also going to be like 6 new scenarios. So it's going to be essentially like an anthology of individual like adventures you can do. So some of them focus on more sort of like wrestling themed stuff. Like I've got one which is like a very sort of like goofy, like you versus a faction of people who hate you. Then some go to like harder places. There's one which is essentially you in a mask, like trashing a GIC to send off like referrals that have been rejected by a doctor for gatekeeping reasons. There's one
Sick.
where it's like you're going for a locker room to kick out someone who's bigoted because you discovered a burner account of theirs. Then there's one that's like through a crawl through time where it's just like you and like your greatest rival. So that's sort of, I guess, bringing in homoerotic elements of wrestling and exploring that. And as well as that, I'm going to include in the book like lots of different modes of play, and I am forgetting. Oh yeah, I'm going to include a series of personal essays, some of which is on stuff like, oh, here's what I liked about wrestling, and here's what I learned to hate about wrestling. And then some is stuff which is I start the book with an essay about, what I got out of wrestling, which is a very personal essay. And then the second essay is me talking about, I don't know how comfortable I am with how much I put personal life in my own books. I just keep doing it.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. I like I like works that kind of explore like I think that there's a lot to be admired in work that is like comfortable with it with the contradictions that it kind of uh, kind of contains. I think that's really cool and really admirable. Um, I what was I gonna say? Something. Oh yeah, I super feel you in terms of like discovering the part of yourself, like the things like like separating the parts of your like the parts of your work that like you're uncomfortable with from like the things that you think you might get shit for. Um, and just being okay, being unapologetic and being okay, and not letting the work apologize for itself. I think has been really important for me as a creator.
Mm, yeah, I'm very excited for Transgender Deathmatch Legion 2. I don't think Transgender Deathmatch Legion 1 is like apologetic for itself. I think it avoids things out of a fear of getting yelled at, maybe.
Yeah, fair.
Which is fine. It was 2 years ago. Whereas, yeah, this is one that's like not backing down. I need someone to edit the game properly before it goes to Backakit in October, and I'm like, yeah, I just need to make sure I find an editor who's not going to say, hey, maybe you should remove the part where you can like attack a very obvious stand-in for a current British politician. I'm like, I don't want someone who's going to say that.
Yeah,
I want someone who's going like, yeah, here's how we make sure this is really identifiably a relevant British politician.
yeah, because like, gosh, the I I feel like the tone has changed a lot over the last couple of years. Maybe this is naivete on my part, just because I've had success in making stuff that's like really, freakish. But I do feel like we're in an environment to do stuff like this. Oh, I need to bring in one of my birds. I totally forgot to bring in Trevor the interview bird, and I will be punished for this dearly. They're gonna be taking things from me. Shh. Um, but yeah, I feel like I can see why you would like want to do this now. I guess is I guess my point. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, yeah, definitely. I think also in my mind, I'm like, Transgender Deathmatch Legend. I think it's a really brilliantly designed game. I think it's the best title I've ever came up with.
It's really good.
And probably ever will. And so in my mind, I'm like, I really should, try and I'm gonna try and do back here. I really should try and get this the most success I can get out of this good title.
Yeah, we need to get to when is transgender deathmatch 5.5e coming? Um, we need to get as many of these. We need to print these things out. Um,
That's the thing. Yeah, it just did well. I could imagine myself like in another 2 years doing like, oh, here's a third one. I thought of more ideas for this. Like, yeah, it's odd to label something as a sequel rather than a second edition.
I have a really bad joke.
Yeah.
When you do 3.5, there's gonna be like a contingency of T girls who don't like it, and they're gonna make Tran Finder. Um, um, no, but that's wonderful. I think it's good to have something that you feel like. It's good to have a good name, and it's good to have a good thing. It's good to have a thing that you feel like is really strong and you can iterate on for a while. I love that for you. Um, if the person you beat up's name rhymes with Vile Barrage, I'm so in. So true.
More specific, it's someone who's in power.
Oh.
I don't know if I should actively say that I don't know if you want me to
No, you
name the
should.
politician on the podcast.
You absolutely can.
Oh, it's like during the crawl for the GIC, you have an opportunity to beat up someone who is labeled as the British Health Secretary.
Huh. Wild. That's awesome. Um, no, but that rules.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for it. The link there, I've got two links. I originally had it being deathmatch.ratwave.uk, and then I was like, I can't write this on TikTok. So my
Right.
backup, deathmatch.ratwaveuk does work, but you now can also find it at gender.ratwave.uk.
Awesome. Sick as hell. Cool. I like that you have all these little links. That's really good. Um, it's good to have the shortcut links. Um, in terms of
Yeah.
games games broadly, games made by others, are there any games that you were playing, reading, thinking about, looking at that that you'd like to talk about? Uh,
Yeah. What have I been playing? I started recently going to. I got actually clued up to it by like someone who was during the Psycho Dungeon Kickstarter. No, right before it, I had a slight breakdown, and I got lined up with like a recovery officer in my area. He was like, maybe you should go to this board game cafe. They have like meetings there. Actually, I think at some point she was like, she got up like a list of things. It was like, oh, this is specifically for queer people. Would you be interested in that? And I'm like, come on, but I was going to be like, babes, you've seen how I look. I'm. Come
what do you
on.
think I am?
But yeah, so I started running and in some games there. I did actually just come back from one today, but that was a playtest of a game of mine, so I won't mention that. I played like a game recently. One of the first things I ran there was it's actually quite a old-ish game of his now, but I ran Witch of the Westmoreland by Laurie O'Connell, which was a, an Arthurian knight who's injured, and your companion sort of taking him to a witch. And we ended up playing that as like a. We ended up playing one of the characters as essentially a Arthurian nepo baby who was just like, oh, this guy really sucks, and the forest is really trying to teach him a lesson about everything.
That's fun.
But yeah, it means I've been looking like there's some stuff I've been thinking about running there that I haven't got the chance to yet, either because I've not felt up for running Sank, or occasionally because I've swapped to. Actually, I'm just going to playtest one of my own game quick. But I'm really wanting to run Hounds by Possible World Games there.
Right.
I had an idea I might run like Zero Void by MacGuffin and Co. there as well. Yeah, I'm trying to think of things I'm looking forward to coming out that I have not played yet. I'm a bit blanking.
That's okay.
I'm really, yeah, no, I'm excited. I would keep meaning to check out more a page for like the One Shot Network anthology thing.
Oh
That seems
yeah,
really interesting.
that does seem cool.
Um, because I do enjoy a lot of like micro RPG stuff. I just am like, oh yeah, I should look more into that page because I keep seeing stuff on Twitter. I feel I've had a weird couple of weeks where I've looked at the internet a lot and not necessarily taken much in because I've been focused on various bits and pieces of stuff I needed to get done.
That's understandable. I feel similarly. I feel I've definitely been uh well the problem has been recently that I've been like trying to get creative work done and I had such a period of just doing administrative work that like it's very hard to get back into that headspace. Um but you know, is what it is. Um yeah. How's about we talk about the news? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we have some. I wouldn't necessarily say they're good stories this week, but they're like interesting. um, so yeah, let's. Hang on, I gotta move some windows around here. So I'm realizing that I have a thing that is not supposed to be in this window. In this window. Duh, duh. Okay.
The
Oh, that
new
was.
stuff, right, as well?
Sorry, what was that?
I said you need the new stuff as well, right?
I do. Yes, you're right. Gonna bring in Cordis. Cordis coming from. Uh, like a rainy suburb, and there's like no one around, and it's just quiet and like kind of relaxing. Um, yeah. So this week, unfortunately, we're gonna talk a lot about D&D because a lot of D&D stuff like happened and got written, and a lot of it I read a lot of it because it turns out no matter how much on the show I'm like, wow, we shouldn't give attention to D&D and like D&D needs to die as a cultural object. Uh, it does have like a significant like form. Like I think it is notable to the degree to which like people playing D&D and what the shape of that play looks like affects the way that they encounter uh and talk about and think about indie RPGs when they eventually make the shift. Um, and so I do think it's worth discussing what's happening in that sphere from that angle. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah.
I've never played D&D at all, which is an odd fact about me. But it does mean occasionally when I've run things for people who are new to indie RPGs and only come from a D&D world, they're sometimes asking me like, what would be the equivalent of this and this? And I have to be like, I don't know what you were talking about. You need to translate your thing to someone who doesn't know what you're talking about, and then I can try and translate it back to you. But like you're assuming.
Yeah. D&D, I'm glad that you protected yourself from the devil. Because like I started with D&D and it shaped the way that I think about games. And I had to, there were a lot of philosophies that I had to kind of move away from. Um, so first, PC Gamer released this article that I really liked, and I read through recently, which talks about the um, Baldur's Gate 3 characters essentially becoming mascots for D&D 5.5 Project Sigil Edition, whatever you want to call it. Um, and I found this really interesting because like I think that uh, there's a lot of intentionality that comes into like making quote unquote iconics. Like you're like characters who are going to represent your playbooks or classes or whatever else. Like Pathfinder, I think is a great example of a game that has really robust and interesting iconics who like show up cross media in a really good way. Um, but like what happens when you have iconics and then suddenly there's a game that has characters that are like 10 times more famous than them and you have to like pivot to being like, okay, this is the iconic rogue now, this is the iconic uh barbarian, and also they have like character traits that aren't available in normal D&D. Like you can't be a vampire spawn at level 1 like Astarion is. You can't have Karlach's infernal engine. Um so like I don't know, I find it really interesting, and like this article is more about like how should we feel as people who like Baldur's Gate 3. I'll admit it, I liked the game. I thought it was good. Uh how should people who liked Baldur's Gate 3 feel about like them basically reusing these characters forever? And I agree with the general conclusion, which is like pretty bad. Like it's probably these characters are probably going to get bastardized and put through the shredder. Um, and obviously Larian doesn't have control over them anymore. Never had control over them in the first place, but like even less now.
Has solidly moved on and is like, well, good luck with that. Do what you
Good
will.
luck with that. Um, all barbarians get a
Yeah,
demon in the
it's
chest. Chicken in every garage and a car in every kitchen. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, it's. I'm curious if this does happen with any other like RPG things that then get sort of like RPG things come from a source and are going out there. The funny thing is, I feel if you had asked like, oh, well, an iconic, well, a big mainstream adaptation of D&D affect people's perception of things. I think if you asked that at the start of 2023, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I guess maybe that movie could be a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the movie would have been really the thing that I would expect would have a big impact
Yeah.
on tables, but like I, there's another element to this which I think is really like interesting, which is like so the thing about iconics, right, is like there are two contexts that iconics can show up in, which is a cool picture in a tabletop in a TTRPG book, or a companion in a computer RPG. And I I don't think like what I'm imagining the intention with the like Astarion and Karlach stuff we've been seeing is like these are gonna be you're gonna have NPC Karlachs and Astarions showing up in your games in your adventures, um, but like so you have a character with this is very D&D brain to me, but like I'm getting deep in the weeds of this, but like you have a character with class levels who's like gonna be a companion who the DM is controlling. It's just yeah, they screwed up by knocking the Vox Mach. We're gonna talk about Vox Machina rights later. We're gonna be talking about Critical Role crossovers and soon. Yeah, it's interesting, but
I
there's
think
yeah.
the thing is saying about like people not working how they would work in games does remind me of an interesting thing. I think it was a response not from someone I follow. I think it was just something I saw to like the original D&D, like the D&D movie trailer way back, where someone seemed to make the argument that they didn't feel it was like if you were adapting a tabletop game, everything you include in the film should be something that is possible in a game. And as someone
Right.
who likes films and who's enjoyed most adaptation stuff, wrestling, like you should make a good film before anything else.
Yeah.
I really disagree on it, but it is interesting. I feel as the fact that like if you do have like big budget or stuff in other mediums, or even like they might have examples of play, not really because they're not, it's not actually like play in the same way, but like they're kind of like the same sort of like modeling of game space possibilities. And I do get if that was the primary intention of any of these things, like, oh, they're modeling game possibilities, yeah, stick with what's actually possible. It's not, they're all intended to be like art in their own right by the people who are, you know, in the nitty gritty of caring about making them.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, agreed. Like, I think that it's important for like, it's important for actual media to think first about like what is interesting, what's interesting storytelling, rather than like what's literally possible. Um, I feel like there's also an element of this that's like, uh, people talk about like the Mulligan effect or like the Mercer effect, where it's like your GM is going to be like trying to do uh some like really intense shit at the table and is probably going to fail because they're not they're not an improviser, um and unless your GM is a good improviser, right? But I like I'm curious, like what is the Larian effect going to be? Like, are we going to be seeing people like are people going to want like weird like worm skill trees in their in their fantasy TTRPGs now? Um, like having weird little character bound effects. I feel like that's another thing. I don't know. I just find it interesting. Anytime that there's like outside media that starts to like kind of seep into the way that people perceive like TTRPGs, I find it really like interesting, because like you wind up with like there's the more literal side of it where it's like here's the Adventure Zone manual, right? Here's how to run the Adventure Zone balance for your party. But then you also have stuff like this where it's like here's Karlach and Astarion. Put them in your game of Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know how that even really looks at a table. It's been years since I, played D&D, or was at tables where people were like drawing so directly from like other like outside stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's fascinating. Um, Herm. Do we want to talk about? Let's talk about the sigil side of this. This is kind of a lead-in, which is this really great Rascal article, um, where they talk about the the secret D&D live show, which had the Project Sigil, and the voice actors for Karlach and Astarion, and then Brenly Mulligan, Abria Iyengar, and who was the last person? Anjali Bhimani.
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
and it's really funny because it's like the first half, literally the tagline is they had us in the first half. I'm not gonna lie. Um, the first half of the thing was like really great, and then suddenly the second half they open up Sigil for combat, and it's like horrible. It's like a complete ass.
Yeah. It's yeah, I imagine for the decline of halves, the I don't think we could recapping it do it justice because it sounds
No.
so brutal. I'd definitely recommend giving it a read if you have a Rascal subscription or just want to pay for that article because it's so
Yeah. This is one of my
yeah,
favorite.
it sounds like a real sudden drop off.
Uh, D&D combat is notorious for being a slog, but when Brenly Mulligan has to ask, "Is her turnover?" there's a real problem. um, really good article. Um, but that also leads into another Rascal article. I try not to just draw too much from their stuff, but they've been kind of the only people doing actual reporting on this stuff, so you know, there's not really another source for me to get like actual interviews about Sigil and stuff. So this article is really interesting. This is an interview with uh, the like co-creator Chris Chow. Um, so what were my notes on this? Um, so Sigil is this like 3D Unreal Engine 5 tool, um, which is really strange to me personally because like IMO, I would think that a browser tool would be like if you're trying to get the largest audience, right? Um, I feel like a browser tool would be
Yeah, they're
best.
like explicitly not doing browsers, just console. Like, as a PC, I guess, like yeah, thing itself, but also aiming for consoles, which seems bizarre to me.
Yeah, like I can't imagine. Like I'm imagining the environment where like like okay, you have this thing installed on your PlayStation 5, right? Like
Yeah.
already pretty crazy. And it's like you're sitting you have like a couch. Everybody's sitting on the couch. They have their character sheets like I guess on a clipboard or like writing them on like a coffee table in front of the couch, and then you have the thing on the screen. One person has a PlayStation 5 controller, has a DualShock 5, and they're like moving the little guys around, and like every turn takes like 5 minutes because you have to first figure out what you're doing, then figure out the math for it, then roll the dice, and then do the thing on the screen. Oh, I guess you'd probably roll the dice on the screen. Um,
Yeah. And then probably as well, I guess it's like if you have multiple friends who all have Project Sigil on their PS5, you could start on like all of your dual shocks there and your little plug-in headphones.
yeah, I guess
I'm just not seeing the vision.
online multiplayer. I guess you could run D&D for your friends on your PlayStation, but it's like a really bizarre. It's just a very bizarre use case, and I say this as the person who was like low key kind of excited for that one VR app where it's like the GM is like overlooking the table from VR, and then the players are like acting like I liked the idea of that, but That's because that had like a gimmick. This is just kind of nothing. Um, what are some other
Yeah, it feels
things?
so gimmicky while not held together by any actual thing.
Hmm.
Like, there's nothing that's a gimmick that you're like, oh, that's why you'd enjoy it for the gimmick, but every single part of it feels like a gimmick. Am I
Yeah,
making any sense there?
yeah. It doesn't have anything that's like really like sticky, but it is all gimmicks. um,
I did not expect to see mentioned in the interview like the a reference to machinima, not as in like the channel, but as the like you know filming stuff in a video game engine.
this bit was really weird. Um, I, I don't know if the answer that Chow gave is really clarifying. I kind of just want to read this word for word because it's like really. I was
Yeah.
kind of taken. I was also kind of taken aback by this. Um, to your streaming point, yes, but it's a very different kind of streaming because it's not true machinima. It's not a cutscene in Baldur's Gate 3. They're always going to be better at it because they're choosing a specific experience. In D&D, anything can happen, which is the fun. That's where it'll differ. So Carter asks, a lot of folks reading this won't have any idea what machinima is. Chow says, you remember Robot Chicken? There's a lot of stop motion and playing with toys to tell a story. That's what machinima is, and that's what we are too. We're not going to animate the characters because you need to be able to do anything with them. That's really a video game toolset. In a lot of cases, we've been using screenshots to tell stories too. The DM will go in and set something up and go, here's the entrance to the dungeon. It's just like a picture in a book. You got to make it, and you did it without spending much time. That does not answer the... That's not clarifying at all.
It does not answer the basic question of, hey, you just used a term that's not really been relevant since 2009. Feel free, like, explaining it for us here in Grand Old 24. It's an interesting sense of, I guess, what his vision is, of, like, the visual idea of it being almost like prop work. But honestly, I listen to this and I'm sort of like, oh, maybe you should just give a GM like a decent webcam and a set of puppets. Like,
Yeah.
maybe that's all that you need.
Doing a little puppet show for my players. That would be awesome, actually. That fucks. There should be a TTRPG where like you have to do that. You have to have like a little puppet show for your players.
It did make me go, oh, are there any? I'm sure there must be loads indie TTRPGs where it's like, yeah, you can only play this in an online multiplayer game you make of, I don't know, it would be Halo 3, I guess, is where my mind's immediately going.
That would fuck, yeah. I love that. What did I write here? Oh yeah, I still feel strongly about this. So I'll just read what I said. What I wrote down. One of my initial concerns with this as a once D&D player and a current VTT enthusiast was that it would be something of a walled garden, and you wouldn't be able to import models to have a degree of versatility in what you present to the players. This is basically confirmed here. OMM's One More Multiverse succeeded in this area since it allowed you to import basically any pixel art. I think that like let's say this comes out in 2025 and it's like I want to have my players fight a Modron, right? And it's like, sorry, buddy, Modrons aren't coming till 2027. And it's like, all right, I guess I'll just use a skeleton for them. Whatever, fuck it. Like, that immediately creates a barrier where it's like something like OMM. It's like, oh, I'll just find like a pixel art little robot and I'll put that in, or I'll just use something from like their big bank of stuff. And I think like the specificity and like both D&D's specificity and like the limits and an intentional like you know like money gatekeeping. There's a word for that, but you know what I mean, like gating of content and gating of resources, like I think is going to make this a very frustrating tool to use, because you'll be like, you'll try to improvise something that's like on a table in the DMG, in the DM's guide, and then suddenly it'll be like, oh yeah, you need to spend $5 to get beholders, and I just feel like that could be a big problem.
Yeah, also, I think remembering how it sounded like the sigil thing in the secret live show really slowed down, I can totally imagine the thing of like, Yeah, you're promising a lot of like tool set stuff. If it's not all there straight away, you're actually just like squishing what people, and why did I use the word squishing? Squishing what people could do in the game using this. Like it's not opening possibilities. It's just narrowing them. Narrowing is such a better word than squishing.
I like squishing. Squishing is good. Um, the other element of this is the pre-order stuff, where it's like you get a bunch of D&D Beyond backgrounds and sigil stuff for pre-ordering the books, and like they say in this interview, we see this as a secondary like way of playing the game, or like an option, but like fundamentally, if one of your pre-order bonuses is a digital good for this thing, then it's there are going to be certain expectations that kind of come up with that. Um,
Mm, yeah, or I guess maybe it's a thing of hoping people who would be pre-ordering the game anyway will now feel some that they've incidentally some cost into sigil.
yeah, true. Um, I noted that there's a part where they're like, yeah, so we're not going to import like full adventures into this. Like, it's just going to be like little modules, like little like environments. And I can really see that like I feel like that would be the main thing that I would want out of this is like easily being able to play adventures that they're putting out in in a digital format. Or not I, but the version of me. If I went back 5 years and I
One
told,
might want to play their adventures.
yeah, if I because I don't like I don't like adventure modules. But if I were to play an adventure module, like I think a VTT that has everything set up for me would be the way I'd want to do it. Um, and the fact that this is not something that they're interested in doing. They're only a team of 30 people doing sigil. I I don't I don't expect this to do very well. That I guess that's kind of my main point. Is I see a lot of contradictions
Yeah.
here, and I'm suspecting that this is going to flop.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if I heard of this launching as it sounds like it currently is and being like a big thing that people are excited about. I feel it will either be a flop or it does not launch when it's said to because we hear a big Project Sigil is getting a heavy rework headline at some point.
Yeah. Um, I don't mean to be, obviously there's like a very small team that's working for a very big company, so I don't want to be mean to the 30 or so people who are working on this, but uh, you know, that's how it is.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
phrase.
I'm sure they're doing their best, and some of it's probably just like, yeah, I just don't see what you see in this in terms of possibilities of VTD stuff. Like I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing what excites them, but I'm sure it does excite them.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Um, do you want to talk about I don't even know what we're gonna say about this. It's just really funny. You want to talk about Among Us?
Yeah, I feel. Yeah, I feel it's headline.
So, Among Us crossover with Critical Role um is out now. Okay. So like here's the thing. My understanding is that they do have like canon designs for like characters in Critical Role that they put on screen. Um this is also FOMO, which sucks. But like these just look like a bunch of fantasy characters to me in a way that's like not even the VTuber ones. I was like, okay, I can go find that character. Like they have a distinct enough design. Uh, I I feel like the Critical Role team. I'm sure that they're wonderful role players because they're all like improvisers and actors and stuff. But like, man, the character designs that I've seen from Critical Role just like blend together in a like slurry of multicolored hair and horns and elf ears. Like, quite frankly.
Yeah, I've never felt the appeal of Critical Role, but I also have never even like bothered to like look into it. So I have nothing mean to say, but also I don't have anything nice to say because
Fair.
it's a thing that's just profoundly uninterested me. This has prompted the weird question in my mind of like, if you had an option to get a weird video game crossover deal for you, do you know what you'd want most of all?
Oh, for one of my games?
Yeah.
Huh.
What would you want the Sapphic World crossover to be?
Right. I. Hmm. Oh, that's really hard. I think if
I'm
I'm being
like, I don't
realistic,
know if I want to.
I know Wildermyth is over, but I would want a Wildermyth. I would want like a Wildermyth like adventure where you like go, or like where like Sapphic World characters are like crossing over into Wildermyth. I think that'd be awesome, uh, and very weird. Uh, what other games would I want the big Sapphic World crossover with? Ah, jeez.
Yeah, I feel like I don't necessarily want the idea of like, hey, it's Transmit from Terminal. They're in Fortnite now. It would be funny, but I don't know if I want that.
Oh God. Yeah.
Um, yeah, like, could I imagine any of my games where it's like, oh yeah, I could see how you dress a Fall Guy up as that.
I think you could do a pretty good Vampire Survivors Sapphic World crossover. I think that Sapphic World's characters would like lend really well
Ooh.
to like Vampire Survivors characters, and like you get some good weapons and Legos are good. Sapphic World Legos would be Sapphic World
Ooh.
Uno. God, Monopoly. I mean, I could just write
I'm now
Sapphic World
going for
Monopoly.
games that don't have like crossover stuff. So in my mind, I'm going like, yeah, yeah, please make a Balatro Joker themed after To Embrace a Swamp Creature. I am not a crackpot.
God. Oh yeah, you're a Mountain Goat's head, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah, I had the first BOB game I did where I put a lot of the like way figure out playbooks and setting elements in terms of how I then did them in Psycho Dungeon was a game that I called How to Embrace a Swamp Creature, and then I renamed to Embrace a Swamp Creature because I think for people who didn't know the Mountain Goats, How made it sound a bit comedic. But that was a game that was really it's about being like mentally ill swamp things in a deprived commuter town, and it was a lot of semi-autobiography about growing up queer and neurodivergent in Essex in the UK. I think anytime I
Yeah.
go to BOB, I'm like, what if I did just comment like really not that much filtered commentary on the events of my life and the political circumstances that led to them?
That's allowed, I think. Um, that's cool though. I really like what is that from is it called? I don't think that album's not called Autoclave. It's Heretic Pride. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Heretic Bride, yes, the
Autoclave's
album,
in
yeah,
there. Yeah, that's a good one.
yeah, yeah, I like that
I
one.
am also a big Mountain Goats liker, so uh, um,
That makes sense to me.
yeah, yeah. Uh, Autopsy Feast and Warframe crossover would be pretty fucking sick. Just because like Autopsy Feast isn't like it's not really supposed to be Warframe, but it kind of is in some ways. It's also Star Wars. It's also Spore somehow. Uh, you know, where we contain multitudes.
Um, yeah, put for Transgender Deathmatch Legend 2, like the way I'm gonna do the visuals is I'm gonna go take a photo shoot with my ex-girlfriend. We're gonna dress up and fight each other on the street. So I
Fuck
think that
yeah.
means the mascot character for TDL2 is me and my ex.
Yeah.
So I think we should be put in as Brawlhalla characters. I think that's a
Oh
valid
yeah,
crossover.
that's awesome. Um, we're putting you two are going to be iconics. We're putting you in Sigil. That's going to be one of the crossovers for Uh, that was another thing with sigils. They talked about like, yeah, we might do crossovers at some point, which is like, I guess makes sense because they did the Rick and Morty thing. But yeah, uh, you know, sometimes the news is beautiful and lovely, and we can talk about great games that are coming out. And sometimes it's this. So that's all I got to say about that. Um, okay, do you want to take 5, and then we'll read some emails? Please
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
send your emails to darlingdemoneclipse@gmail.com. We'll be back at 05 and see you all in a bit. Hello, everybody. We're back, and we're here to answer your questions. Bring in Apocrypha, the male bird. Um, shh. Now, I actually don't know what Apocrypha's gender is, or sex. um, Male only refers to Apocrypha's role, broad role. Um,
I I know I listened to a podcast which made a very silly joke being about like, oh, is that the mailman or female man?
it's funny. Um, Wait, is that a comedy Bang Bang bit?
I don't know. If it was,
Huh.
it was not where I heard that, but I could see it being bits through bits,
Yeah, it just strikes me
echoes.
as something Scott Ackerman would say. Thank you for the mail, Doc. We will read that in a moment. I want to get through. We have some questions from last week from Goblin that did not get answered. Um, these are good ones. So, the first question from Goblin is, what do you do with your ideas for games? Other than writing them down, how do you develop them and figure out which of them has potential? Hmm.
I am, as part of answering, just going to go to. So I have a Discord which is just labeled as self notes. It's because
Mm.
I, depending on who asks, say that games are my job. I joke to people I'm self-employed when the Department for Work and Pensions wants me to look for work. I'm unemployed when I it's my turn to buy around. Um, but so I also have a section there which is like rando thoughts where I just write any ideas down where I'm randomly like, oh, is there anything for space station? Or oh, that film was quite good. What if you did a game like that? Uh, don't know why they all have this accent.
Yeah, it's kind of a
Um,
yeah.
sometimes I have a lot of ideas that are jotted down. I feel like I'm always someone who is working on like five things at once, and sometimes it means like they all finish very close together, like, or other times it means I have a lot of stuff banked. Like, to be honest, I Transcended Deathmatch Legend 2 and Psycho Dungeon written by like the end of January, and then they're what I've spent a lot of this year on so far. But then sometimes I don't know. The last game I released on itch is a game called Out of the Folder. I was like, I want to make a game in 2 weeks to prove I can still do it to myself. But developing them, sometimes it's, I guess, figuring out whatever interested me most. Like, if sometimes I'm think like, oh, I wanted to try out this system I came up with, and I want to know if it works. What would be a fun thing to hang off of this system? And I dig at that because that's the thing that interests me. Other times it's like, oh, like with Psycho Dungeon, it was like, I've come up with this cool premise. How can I translate that premise game? So I think developing them is always figuring out like what was the thing that got me excited about this idea in the first place, and how do I grow that, and then grow the things around it that it what works properly. Is at least how I'd approach it.
Yeah, for me, it's something. It has to be something that's like deeply, that like sinks its hooks into me in a deep way, and then from there, I kind of figure out like how would I make this a thing, whether it be a mechanic or a theme or a a vibe, and often I'm just trying to do like I'm trying to finish up stuff and then get onto new stuff, which is impossible sometimes. Like Sapphic World is kind of a really big project that I've been working on for a really long time, and I often have to put that aside to work on other stuff because it is just a it's a whole. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think generally just kind of knowing what stuff has really gripped me is where I find which games I actually want to make. Um, Next is another from Goblin. What is your favorite magic system you've seen? The old D&D Vancian spell slot system is really goddamn boring, but it dominates the space due to D&D's cultural cachet. Hmm.
I have played very few games now that I think about it with like defined magic systems. Well, like magic is separate from, I guess. I don't know. I'm thinking like the first game I played more than a single session of was Monster Hearts, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think there's like a defined magical system there that is distinct from like how roles for other things work. The last game I did a Balatro inspired magical system because I was like, well, what if each card corresponds to something? But like, I have
Sick.
heard people mention Vancian spell slots a lot, and I still don't know what that means or how it works at
It's
all.
just like every day you have a certain amount of slot, like a certain amount of spells. Slots is a really misleading term because it's actually like spell, like tokens almost. Like you're spending like you've like 4 level 1 spell tokens, 4 level 2 spell tokens, 3 level 3 or whatever depending on your level, and then like you spend one of those to cast a spell. That spell has a series of effects that go on, and then the next day you can you get all your tokens back, and you have like a maximum essentially. Um, but yeah, it's
Ah. I
not a
feel it would
very
appeal to me more if it was tokens.
yeah. Slots is a really really misleading word, and it like makes it so confusing. Uh, but yeah, Lilith, what is the line? I don't know what you mean. I genuinely don't know what you mean about uh, what am I supposed to be saying? D66 transformation table? Is that it? I don't. What are you referencing? What iconic thing have I said that you need me to say again?
Are you just
Um,
trying to now run through all of your classic phrases?
about magic systems? Oh, like Vancian's bad? Wait, what have I said about magic systems? I genuinely I don't I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, oh no, you're right. Yes, I don't like the term magic system because magic. Yeah, no, I. Yes, you're right. I forgot that I have this opinion. Thank you, Lilith. I don't like the term magic system because I think that, like, if magic is like systemic in your setting, then like it's not magic, it's science, right? The moment that magic becomes a system, it stops being magical. I think it just becomes like a calculable science of your setting. Um, Now, like in terms of TTRPGs, I think it makes sense because it's like this is the literal system by which you use magic. Um,
Mm.
but I don't think in a setting it makes sense.
Oh yeah, I get what you mean and agree with that.
Yeah,
I also find that is an interesting fact that we say magic system and meaning it in D&D stuff, as opposed to setting element stuff.
yeah. Spell slots are misleading because like a slot machine using a spell should be gamble to burn it out. That'd be awesome. I like a little bit of luck on my things. I liked in warehouse bitches I did a thing where it's a belonging outside belonging game, but uh, your tokens can be heads or tails, um, and depending on if they're heads or tails, you can do like different vulnerable or strong moves. And then whenever anyone uses magic, it flips every coin or every token to like either the opposite side or you flip it randomly. Um, I thought that was fun. I thought that had a really like I like the idea of magic having like a notable impact on like the system itself when it happens. Um,
Yeah, I do. I was just looking over at the zines I have and trying to remember which ones use magic, so I could say things about stuff that wasn't just like, oh, here's what I've. But I was thinking like Lichcraft, which is like the game about becoming immortal, so you can get to the end of a NHS waiting list. Is like
uh,
that's about like gathering items for a spell, and there I'm like, yeah, I could be interested in a game which made magic a lot like cooking.
right, yeah. That sounds like a cool game. I should check that out. Um,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, specifically to get to the end of like the trans healthcare
mhm.
waiting list. But yeah, Lichcraft. is cool. I'm actually dealing at some cons, at some conventions in the UK with Laurie before the end of the year.
Hell yeah. Next is from Duck. Shout out a good TTRPG related newsletter you look forward to seeing. I mean, Rascal's one I think is pretty good. I don't really have any like creator ones that I really look forward to.
I do. I do tend to subscribe to people's stuff when I see them. I feel a lot of the people I do follow are like usually a bit more erratically like it's like sending when they've got stuff. Like I've swapped to I send a newsletter every month, and it's increasingly a bit like sometimes it's like I'll like send it out and then I'm like I don't know if I should have been that personal in the newsletter, which is I think a consistent conflict I have with creativity. I really enjoy Gem Room Games newsletter. It's just a shout out to two people who keep up a monthly newsletter, and I enjoy seeing what they're up to every month.
Hell
If you
yeah.
want mine, it's at newsletter.ratwave.uk because I can do that for everything.
True.
.ratwave.uk, and now it's just mad with power.
Let me send that out. Oh, you already did. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, check that out. In fact, I'm literally gonna I'm in there. I'm in it. Okay. All right. What else here? Another one from Duck. Thoughts on hang on. Thoughts on TTRPGs with deck building elements. I've been seeing more of them recently, but I don't think they use their full potential. Can they learn from board games? It's a cool idea. It's a fun thing to explore.
Yeah.
I think.
I've not managed to like play or read through much things with deck building elements where there's like a sort of whole deck for it, but I really enjoy like Minerva, where you like modify a deck of playing cards throughout that is as your characters grow. I think like Biscuit Fun Games had a Hunt Through the Bitter Cold, which is you're discarding some things from like a regular deck of playing cards. I think it's like really interesting seeing people try to do that with decks of cards, especially because like they're kind of a thing that it is much easier to get a hold of than dice even. But also, yeah, making that deck building element feel like satisfying there and not just like you've randomized you've tightened the ratio on your random numbers, I think is a challenge. It's kind of like it's a really interesting challenge, but I think it is a sort of thing of like how are you meeting what you can design and then what you can facilitate that's needed to play the game.
Yeah, I think there's something like so like that there's something that's like equally kind of contradiction and also like a design space I think that's present here, which is like you have like in a lot of games you make a character, right? Like that is a feature of a lot of TTRPGs. And so like deck building kind of is in conflict with that, but could not be. Like if you can make it like compellingly connected to the way that you make your character, or have like, you know, making your deck be making your character. I think that there's some interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting area. I've not seen that many either, so I'd really have to look at games that have that concept and kind of wrap my noodle around them. But it's a cool idea. Smiles.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We don't have any other emails. Any questions from chat? I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions for myself or Kayla. Otherwise, we may wrap up early because this is the second Dovecote of the week, and you know, I am a little tired, a little sleepy.
That makes sense. That's useful for me with time difference as well. I wonder how close people have gotten to playing thoughts on board game mechanics and TTRPGs. I
Mhm.
used to play more board games, and then I stopped because I played a lot of board games with an ex who I had a really bad breakup with, and I may have like this sounds dramatic. I may have slight board game trauma. I
Hmm.
feel a bit uncomfortable around board games a lot, but I do occasionally notice myself when I have played more. I don't know out there, like less so board games, but a lot of card game mechanics. I do just sometimes like rip fully. Like it makes sense to me that I played Balatro and then made a game where playing poker hands was a thing because like I do find that stuff really compelling. Like transgender deathmatch legends called trick taking rules and how a lot of the trump works. They were ripped from like a card game called Fox in the Forest, and I was like, oh, that's simple. It is unrelated in terms of board game stuff. I think that can be interesting, but card games has made me go like, yeah, I do enjoy just like, oh, what's this thing done? How could that be a vehicle for role playing instead of just numbers?
Yeah, I I've been playing a lot of Space Station 14 recently, which is not a board game, which is a video game, but it's a role play video game, right? And a thing that I've noticed with it, I don't know if this is really answering the question. I'm just kind of like pontificating on uh, uh, board games and role play. The thing that I've noticed about SS14 is that there are kind of contradictory and like pushing together priorities where it's like good gameplay and good roleplay, and like like for example, I was playing a game where everyone was zombies and we were rushing the evac ship, and people started beating up like the control consoles, and someone had to go into OOC and be like, hey, like out of character and be like, hey, uh, that may be good for us to stop the evac ship from leaving, but as zombies we would not do that, right? Um, and so I think like in terms of a TTRPG with board game elements, I think that those same sort of contradictions exist where it's like not contradictions, but like uh, those same pressures exist where you are simultaneously trying to play your character well and also play the game well. Um, and I think that those can be really interesting dynamics. I don't think they're bad, even in any way, shape, or form. Um, but I do think that like writing a book like that, you have to be very cautious about that. Um, but it's definitely
Yeah.
a cool space to explore. What's your favorite game that you own but haven't played yet? Um, hmm.
It's a lot of candidates.
Yeah, same.
um, I feel I'm going to restrict myself to things where I'm like, oh, I own this. I haven't played it yet. I'd love to. And also, it doesn't feel. Because I was looking over at my zines and I'm like, yeah, a lot of these are things I haven't played yet, but like, I could end up playing them soon. I'm going to think of games where, like, at the moment, I'm not playing much campaign stuff, and I own Apocalypse Keys, and I'd love to get that to the table.
That's a great game. I played some of
I
that.
also I have read Talk. I really love how Talk by Williams reads. And I was like, I would be really stressed out trying to run Talk. I'd love it
Hmm.
if someone ran Talk for me and I got to be a player in it. But that's one where I'm like, that's a game I own. It would seem really fun to play. I actually have no control over whether I'll ever play it or because I can't be the one to make it happen because of this. It's like, oh, this feels like a really tactical game, and I cut my teeth on GM-less like card-based games or stuff. Like, I don't know how to run these things.
This is maybe biased because this is my friend's game, but I've been really meaning to play Jess Levine's Going Rogue. Uh, I own it. I've read it. I still have not gotten around to playing it. I haven't had a group for it.
No, yeah, that's a really cool one.
Uh, from Duck, I have a question. I don't know if you have the context for this, but say you are in a Matt Pat situation. What TTRPG would you give the Pope, or do you give the Pope? Do you know about the Matt Pat thing?
Did he give a game to the Pope?
He gave Undertale to the Pope.
I see. I
Yeah.
remember, like, just because I live in London, in the UK specifically, seeing a poster for like a musical, talking about it with my housemate, and like a couple weeks later, just reading a What's on Stage article and having to message my friend like, "Hey mate, I think Matt Pat's the producer for that musical."
That's crazy. TSL. Oh yeah, Three Sword Lesbians is a good one.
The catch is the Pope has to be a player or the GM of the game.
Uh,
And who knows what words he'll say while we play a game together.
True. He might. Yeah.
I in my mind I'm like, okay, what game can I get that is most gonna get him to drop?
What game has factions in it? Because then he might even just slip up and accidentally say it.
Yeah.
He'll be like facciones, and he'll
Like does it go like really? Yeah, shouldn't like some of those vowels or stuff there.
I'm thinking about other. In actuality, if I were to give the Pope a TTRPG, I hate to say it again because this is a game that one of my friends made, but I do think that like it's so fucking like well liked and like representative of TTRPGs as a space. I like and like I think would if I were to give it to a religious figure, I like if I had to give a game to a religious figure, I feel like I would give them Wanderhome. You know, I like Wanderhome a lot, and I also think it would be like a good representation.
Yeah, I like Wander Home a lot as well. I kind of think like in terms of how I write BOB, like one half of it in terms of a lot of mechanical stuff is Galactic 2E, and then in terms of how I approach playbooks and a lot of pick lists and stuff, that comes from Wander Home. I don't know why I'm looking in my collection so much.
That's loud.
Yeah, if I then have to like, well, I guess I don't necessarily have to be the one playing the game.
I'm giving the Pope Patchwork World.
Yeah, I'll give the Pope Death Game, mainly just because I think he'd be a bit upset looking at it, and I'd be like, "Oh no, look, Pope, I wrote one of these things here. It's about bad hospitals."
Hell yeah. You feel like, oh, the PSYOP the pacifist game? I don't know what you mean by that. But yeah, I think there are a couple games you can give the Pope and everything would be okay. But yeah, any other questions before I think we'll wrap up in a moment here. But any last questions that you have for myself or Kayla? Feel free to ask. Trying to think if I have any other like last things I want to ask about. Oh yeah, Psycho Dungeon. Is it are you a Persona person or is that just kind of coincidental?
That's entirely coincidental, but I knew about this going into it because I said, "Hey, this is my game," and I messaged two friends. So I have to be like, my friend who has a big Persona hyperfixation was like, "Look, I know it sounds like I'd say this to anything you'd say, but you must know that's very Persona-esque." And I was like, I remember asking them, I was like, "Should I play a Persona game for this?" And I think she was like, "I'd only play one if you wanted to play one." And I'm like, "Okay, I feel comfortable, like, I'd rather explore this idea on its own." It's a lot of, like, ex-teacher stuff. It's a lot of, I've been to therapy and also had lots of breakdown stuff in there.
Yeah, I have not played Persona, but I think when I was initially told about this, it was like pitched as this game is like Persona, so I figured I should ask. I'm not seeing any questions in chat. Kayla, it was wonderful having you. Thank you so much for being on here. Let me shoot your itch over one last time. Check out Kayla's stuff. Really, really great games. And
I have a big link tree for any social media if you do want to follow me on them. And yeah, if you do remember any questions afterwards, feel free to at me on any social media because I often answer them.
Oh, you sent it. Cool. Great. All right. Let me raid someone really quick. Let's see who's live. Who's live? Shouldn't even realize that was up. Okay. Let's raid Jump Drive Project, who's playing Voices of the Void. Go say hi, go watch Aliens and stuff. I think she's playing the new update for that, which seems interesting. I don't own that game. I've just seen everyone and their mother is playing Voices of the Void, at least a little bit on Twitch, so go have fun, go enjoy that. And take care, everyone. We'll be back next week with, I haven't actually announced this yet, this is the first ever, actually, sorry, second ever repeat guest on the Dovecote. Will Yopes is going to be coming on to talk about, I've forgotten the name of the game.
Plasmodics.
Plasmodics, yes. So go be sure to check that out, and take care, everyone. Bye.
Remember,
Bye.
if you don't like what you see, you can change it. It's up to you, really. Goodbye, good luck, and have fun!